And their definitions are quite dangerous. You have non-Muslims defining taqiyya. Most Muslims haven't even heard of taqiyya. And they say, oh, every Muslim is lying to you. It's part of their deen to lie to you, right? This type of discourse is completely ridiculous. You have non-Muslims defining jihad, who are doing exegesis of the Quran for us. So what is tawakkul? Tawakkul is to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's a trust with action. It's very important. It's not just some sort of haphazard attitude, right? So there's a difference between tawakkul and tawakkul. One is a form 5 infinitive for the people that study Arabic. Form 5 masdar. Tawakkul is form 6. Tawakkul is to get in your car and drive 90 miles an hour without a seatbelt and say, Atawakkalu ala Allah. I've trusted Allah. No, this is not tawakkul, right? The classic example is the story of the Bedouin. This is in Tirmidhi, by the way. The Bedouin comes into the masjid. He didn't hobble his camel outside. And the camel is running around outside. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, whose camel is that? He said, that's my camel. Tawakkaltu ala Allah. He said, hobble your camel, tie your camel, then trust in Allah. Right? So we have to do our duty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. It is part of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have lean. The Prophet ﷺ's character has gentleness to it. It's very important. We have to emulate him. You're a gentle person. We'll come back to this. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. If you were harsh or hard-hearted, people would have fled from your presence. فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Right? So ask forgiveness for them and consult them in affairs of the moment. And when you have azima, when you have made a firm decision about something, then put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to be principled people. The ulama say the situation of Muslims in America right now is analogous to the situation of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba in Mecca. Same type of situation. You know, the Meccans, they met at Darul Nidwa. This was their city council. Right? And they were discussing, because every year they had a sort of fair that the Arabs would come from all around the Hijaz, all around Arabia. They would bring their idols and they would have poetry contests. Right? This was the main source of their income, main source of their revenue. Right? So this is now the Quraysh are really, because in reality, most people probably worship money. This is just a fact. Right? When he was talking about wa'd al-banat and these types of, yeah, it was a nuisance, but now he's denouncing their asnam, their idols, right? And these sort of gatherings that the Quraysh were having every year, this was a main source of their revenue. If you see what happened in Medina, the Prophet ﷺ, the first thing he does is he drafts the charter of Medina, where he gives autonomous Jewish rule to the Jewish community. You can have your own courts, judged by the Torah. This is religious pluralism. This is the constitution of Medina. But why do we have khiyana, foka khiyana? Why do we have treachery above treachery by Bani Israel? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, we're going to build our own souk, and we're not going to charge interest. So it's about money. Most people worship money. You mess with their money. That's how they got Al Capone, by the way. Al Capone was the leader of the mafia. They put him in prison for tax evasion. Don't mess with the man's money. That's the lesson. So anyway, they met in the Darul Nidwa. So what should we do about him? This was the whole affair, right? This is the main point here. What should we say about him? So some of them said, let's call him a sha'ir. And they said, no, he doesn't compose poetry. He said, let's call him a kadhib, a liar. And they said, that would be bad for us, because we called him a sadiq al-amin. That's what we called him. The truthful and trustworthy one. That's a title we get now. We look back. So they said, let's call him a sahir. He's a sorcerer. Right? He has sihr. Al-Walid ibn Mughira said this. He said, why do you say this? Because he has the uncanny ability to divide a father from his son. So they call him sahir. So the Quraysh, they sent out these men to the borders of Mecca. Right? These riders out there to sort of intercept people coming into the city. Welcome to Mecca. Enjoy the poetry. Enjoy the festivities. But just one thing, there's a man in the city, his name is Muhammad. Stay away from him. He's a sahib. He's going to bewitch you. Right? So, when you describe him a little bit, this is what he looks like, this is what he's going to do. Right? It's interesting. So these people came into Mecca, right? They had never heard from the Prophet ﷺ himself. They never heard from him. They just heard from his enemies. So a lot of people in this country, they really haven't heard from the Prophet ﷺ. They haven't heard from him because we're failing in our duty. He said, "Ballighu anni walau ayah." Convey from me even one statement. It's very powerful. I was in an interfaith gathering one time. There was like 20 speakers. We had 2 minutes. This was in a church. The young woman that was organizing the event, she said, "You only have 2 minutes." So I thought to myself, "Wallahi, what can I say in 2 minutes? SubhanAllah." I just quoted one hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. لا تدخلوا الجنة حتى تؤمنوا ولا تؤمنوا حتى تحابوا. None of you will enter paradise until you truly believe, and none of you will truly believe until you love one another. Shall I tell you of something that will increase your love? أفشوا السلام بينكم. Spread peace amongst yourselves. So I just less than 2 minutes, 1 minute hadith. And then after the event, this young woman, she came, tears rolling down her face. And she wanted to hug me. She's walking toward me like this. I pulled a sister. I said, "Sister, come here, hurry." I put her in front of me, and she hugged the sister. But she was looking at me, and I was doing like this on my own hand. It's hard to explain. We can't really touch. But one hadith had such an incredible effect. A lot of these people have pure hearts. It's very, very important. Zainul Abidin, he said, "Inna Allah khaba'a thalathan fi thalath." Allah has concealed 3 things in 3 things. Khaba'a ridahu fi ta'atihi. He has concealed his good pleasure in acts of obedience to him. So the lesson here is never underestimate any act of obedience to Allah. If it's something very, very, a quarter in sadaqah, don't underestimate it. Right? For the Tabuk expedition, the Sahaba brought their things. Right? Abdurrahman ibn Auf brought a tray of gold. And Abu Dhar al-Ghifari brought some dates, tamar. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "I don't know which one is heavier in the mizan. I don't know which one is heavier." Because it's based on the person's intention. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't necessarily look at quantity, He looks at quality. And the munafiqeen, they said, "Oh, he brought gold, he just wants to show off. Oh, this one he bought dates, he just wants to, do something to be remembered." This is how munafiqeen, you can't win with them. So he said, and then he said, وَخَبَأَ سُخُتَهُ فِي مَعْصِيَتِهِ. Zainul Abidin is the great grandson of the Prophet ﷺ, the son of Imam Hussein. The qasida we heard from Brother Nur Jarad is from Zainul Abidin. And so he said, Allah has concealed His wrath in acts of disobedience. So never discount any act of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't just say, "Oh, it's just a little bit of ghiba, it's okay." A little ghiba. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Al-ghiba ashaddu min az-zina." This is hadith. Backbiting. Ghiba is worse than fornication, adultery. Right? We have to think about this. I mentioned this yesterday at ASU. I gave a khutbah one time. Older Muslim sister approaches me and she says, "I didn't like what you said in the khutbah." I said, "What did I say?" "You said, don't make ghiba." I said, "What do you mean you don't like that?" And she said, "What are we supposed to talk about?" I said, "Well, subhanAllah.
It's a musibah right there.
What are we supposed to talk about? There's nothing else to talk about? You have to make ghiba?"
He says ghiba.
SubhanAllah, it was a very strange moment for me. So never discount any act of disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? We should have taqwa. Right? This is the essence of Islamic spirituality. Ihsan. The technical term for ihsan is tasawwuf. Tasawwuf, ihsan, tazkiyatun nafs. These are synonymous. Right? Let's not get caught up on words. People say, "No, don't use this word. Don't say celebrate, say commemorate." Okay. What's the point? It's the same thing. Right? The essence of tasawwuf is an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tara. To worship Allah as though you can see Him. إِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ إِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. But if you can't see Him, you have to know, be cognizant that He sees you. Right? any act of disobedience, we should know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching us. We should have mushahada, muraqaba, mushahada, right? The example I use again, a simple example, the child wants to get some cookies from on top of the refrigerator. The first thing the child does is he looks like this. Is my father watching? And he sees his father and he stops, immediately stops. No father watching, he starts going very quietly. Very quietly. Mushahada and then muraqaba. To witness and then to be vigilant. Right? This is how we should live our lives. Mushahada, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us, and then be careful, tread lightly with people. Tread lightly upon the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this is the sifa of the Ibadur Rahman, those who walk hawnan, they walk with humility on the earth. Right? But they're not humiliated. And the Prophet ﷺ said there's a difference. The mu'min is humble, but he is never humiliated. This is what our brother was mentioning earlier. Muhammadur Rasulullah, وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ. They have shiddah, they have toughness. They're proud, they're not haughty, they don't have arrogance. But they're principled people. قُلِ الْحَقُّ وَإِنْ كَانَ مُرًّا وَلَا تَخَفِّ اللَّهِ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ. Speak the truth even if people find it bitter, and never be afraid of people reproaching you for something. You know, this young people struggle with this. There was a brother one time who was on the football team in high school. On the football team. And in high school on Fridays, the football team, they all wear their jerseys. Right? So he was with his football, and he's the only Muslim on the football team. He said they're next to the lunch line, and there was a 15-year-old sister with hijab in the lunch line. He said one of his friends on his football team walked up behind her and started tugging the back of her hijab. She kept going like this. He kept pulling the hijab. And I said to him, what did you do? He said, I didn't do anything. I said, why not? He said, I was embarrassed. I didn't want them to know I was Muslim. Right? No, we have to do what is right. We have to do what is right. Don't be afraid of people. Oh, you're Muslim? Yeah, I'm Muslim. MashaAllah. Alhamdulillah. You should be Muslim. Right? Yeah. This should be our attitude with people. And it's not an arrogance. Islam is something people need. Alhamdulillah bi ni'matil Islam. Praise be to Allah for the ni'mah. It's the greatest blessing. Ibn Abbas, he relates a hadith. Imam al-Haddad, he puts it in the lives of man. It's in the epilogue of Al-Umr al-Awwal, the first life. He says, the Prophet ﷺ came to the Sahaba and he said, ماذا تقول في هذه الآية? What do you say about this ayah? وَمَا كُنْتَ بِجَانِبِ الطُّورِ إِذْ نَادَيْنَا. You were not at the right side of Mount Sinai when we called out. The Sahaba said, Allahu wa Rasuluhu a'lam. He said that was when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Torah to Musa alayhi salam. And Musa alayhi salam was looking in the alwah, the tablets, and he saw the sifat of the nation of Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he said, Allahumma ij'alhum ummati. Oh Allah, make them my ummah. And Allah said to him, your ummah is Bani Israel. And then he kept reading the awsaf of the ummah of Ahmad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he said, Allahumma ij'alni min ummatihi. Make me a man of the ummah of Ahmad. We were the envy of prophets. Musa alayhi salam, he's from the ulul azmi min al-rusul. He's one of the 5 most exalted human beings to ever walk the planet Earth. And he wants to be one of us, a man from the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. This was his dua. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to him, this is a hadith Ibn Abbas relates. And then he says to him, your ummah is Bani Israel. But if you want, I'll let you listen to their voice. The voice of ummah of Ahmad. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ummata Ahmada. And we said in one voice, Labbaik. Ya Rabbana, Labbaik. So Musa alayhi salam heard that. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, this is the meaning. You were not on the right side of Sinai, idh nadayna, when we called out to the ummah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He read the description of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam in the Torah. This is what our most esteemed Qari has read, that the Prophet ﷺ is mentioned in their text. Right? The Quran is a very bold book, by the way, very bold. It makes very bold claims. We have to be able to back it up. We need to do our homework. We need to do diligence. Right? الذين يتبعون الرسول النبي الأمي الذي يجدونه مكتوبا عندهم في التوراة والإنجيل. The Prophet ﷺ is mentioned in these scriptures. You know, when he came to Medina, a rabbi was the first one to see him. Abdullah ibn Salam, he saw the Prophet ﷺ come into Medina to Munawwara, and he said, عرفت أن وجهه ليس بوجه كذاب. I could tell by looking at his face it wasn't the face of a liar. And he said, عرفت. عرفت means to recognize, recognition. In other words, I recognize his face. Why? Because he's mentioned in Torah. I know where it is mentioned. Song of Songs 5:10 to 16. This is in the Bible even today. It's called Shira HaShirim. Shira HaShirim means the greatest shir, the greatest poem. Shira HaShirim in Hebrew. Chapter 5, verses 10 through 16. It says, Dodi Sachva Adom in the Hebrew language. My beloved is white and red. You know Imam Ali, he relates hadith in the Shama'il al-Tirmidhi. Lawnahu azhar abyad mushrab. His skin color is a white mixed with redness. It goes on to say, in the Torah, it says that his head is like gold, his locks are wavy and black as a raven. Read the description in Shama'il. The Prophet ﷺ's hair was neither straight nor curly, but wavy, very black. Shahrat Ku'arev in the Hebrew. Shahrat Ku'arev means black like a raven. But the word Arev, spelled Ayin, Reish, Beit, is also the word for Arab. His hair is black like an Arab. But nobody translates like this. Why? It's called kitman, right? They conceal their message. It goes on to say, describe his hands. He has a smell of myrrh, musk coming from his hands. Allah. It says his body is like, his shoulders are like, he has a beautiful countenance, a beautiful description in those 7 verses. They're called Pesuchim in Hebrew. Verse 16 sounds like this. Chikko mamthaqim vikullo machammadim zehdudi vezarei banoth Yerushalayim. This is what the Hebrew sounds like. His mouth is most sweet. He is Muhammadim. Im is a plural of respect in Hebrew. Jam'un Maliki. He is Muhammad. And he said, this is my beloved, and this is my friend. O daughters of Jerusalem, Araftu anna wajhahu laysa biwajhi kadhab. We have to be able to back these ayat of the Quran. Again, the Quran is a bold text. And if somebody points to the Quran over here says the Prophet says mentioned in the Bible, where is it? And our youth go, I don't know. Oh, you don't know? Why don't you know? You have to know. This is our text. Allah has concealed 3 things in 3 things. Back to Zainul Abidin. His acts of obedience, his pleasure in acts of obedience, his wrath in acts of disobedience. وَخَبَأَ وِلَايَتَهُ فِي خَلْقِهِ. And the last thing he said, and there's another riwayah that he concealed Laylatul Qadr amongst the year. The last thing he said, Allah concealed his saints, his awliya, his friends amongst the creation. Fi khalqihi, not fi al-muslimin. Fi khalqihi, in his creation. So the point here is, this comes from Sayyidina Ali, his father, his grandfather. When you meet someone, treat them like they're a wali of Allah, because you never know their end. Imam al-Qurtubi said, when Sayyidina Umar was prostrating to idols in Mecca, he was beloved of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah knows the end of Umar. Allah knew his end. Sayyidina Umar made the most evil intention in the history of humanity to kill the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and now he's in the roda of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because of transformative love. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change hearts. So this is something that is very important. We have to educate our children correctly. We have to be educated. They're being told constantly, there's no love in Islam. This is very common in today's discourse. Islam doesn't have love. Christianity is about love. Judaism is about love. Islam is not about love. Islam is about cracking the whip, right? You're a servant, or a slave, like in the American context. You're being forced to do things. If not, you'll be thrown into hell and burned forever. This is how it's presented. There's no love in Islam. I met an Iranian pastor. He converted. He was a Muslim. He became a Christian pastor. And I wanted to debate him. And one of the main points he said was, he says, Ali John, Islam khushu'nat است. محبت وجود ندارد در Islam. I said, you didn't reject, I don't consider you a murtad then, because you didn't even know what Islam was. You rejected something that's not even Islam.
That's right.
Yeah. So I said to him, you should stop telling people that you're a murtad, you're an apostate. You so much pride. I apostated from Islam. and they gave him a lot of money. He gets in his Hummer and he drives away. Right? He's a millionaire now. You can make a lot of money. You know, you have these post 9/11 profligates, opportunists, writing books. I was abused as a child. You know, it's all lies.
Yeah.
They pay them a big book deal, $1 million book deal. Right? We can't fall for this type of thing. We have to be very careful. So we have to clarify for our children that love is an extremely important part of our religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says in the Quran why He created humanity. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create jinkind or humanity except to worship me. إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. You know who Abdullah ibn Abbas is? Abdullah ibn Abbas is called Mufassir al-Quran. He is the exegete of the Quran, the exegete of the Quran. Abdullah ibn Abbas min Ahli Bayti Rasulillah. Abdullah ibn Abbas min Ashabi Rasulillah. The Prophet ﷺ took his blessed hand and put it on the chest of Abdullah ibn Abbas. Said, "Oh Allah, give him ta'weel of the Quran. Give him the inner dimension of the true core meaning of the Quran." Abdullah ibn Abbas, he said, "Illa liya'budun" means illa liya'rifun. I did not create jinn and ins except to know me, to have intimate knowledge. Ma'rifah is different than ilm. Ma'rifah is to have intimate knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he continues, and if you had ma'rifah of Allah, you will necessarily have mahabbah of Allah. So his conclusion is, the whole point of creation is love. The entire affair is about love. This is coming from Abdullah ibn Abbas. The point of creation is love. People say there's no love in Islam. وَهُوَ الْغَفُورُ الْوَدُودُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is oft forgiving, the all-loving, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. You know what these mean? Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman. The indiscriminately compassionate. Indiscriminately compassionate. Ar-Rahim, the intimately loving. Intimately loving. Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has different levels of love. The fact that He chose to create creation means that there's an indiscriminate level of love for all of creation. He didn't have to create anything. Allah is al-Jabbar. He's never majboor. Allah chose to create out of an act of will, an act of pure volition from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to demonstrate love. But the greatest demonstration of Allah's love is sending the Anbiya. And the greatest of the Anbiya is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is why he's called Rahmatul lil Alameen. Right? So love is part and parcel of our religion. Children have to know that. The Prophet said, teach your children 3 things. عَلِّمُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ ثَلَاثَ خِصَالٍ. Or in another version of the hadith, أَدِّبُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ عَلَى ثَلَاثٍ. Teach your children or educate your children, discipline your children upon 3 things. حُبُّ نَبِيِّكُمْ وَحُبَّ أَهْلِ بَيْتِهِ وَقِرَاءَةِ الْقُرْآنِ. Love of your Prophet and love of the family of the Prophet and reading of the Quran. This is advice coming from who? The Prophet ﷺ. Your children. Oftentimes parents come to me and they say, my child is a grown man, he's 20 years old, he doesn't pray, he doesn't care about anything, not even fasting, drinking alcohol. Then what kind of childhood did he have? Did you take him to the masjid? Did you read about the Prophet ﷺ? Did you engage the Shama'il, the Sirah? Did he learn how to read the Quran? No. We were new to the country and blah, 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 and it was difficult, the people were making fun of us. And, that's life. You know, it's too late. I don't know what to tell you. Make dua for him. Allah can turn the heart. Muqallib al-qulub. Allah is muqallib al-qulub. Allah can change the heart. Make dua for that. I don't know what else to tell you. Addibu, tarbiyah. Right? We have to discipline children. How do you discipline a child to love the Prophet ﷺ? You train the child. You educate the child. Which virtues do you want your child to have? Rahmah. Right? The first hadith chosen by our ulama, hadith al-Rahmah. For 5-year-old children, the first hadith that children were taught in the traditional Muslim world, hadith al-Rahmah. Right? 23 links in the chain. Ar-Rahimuna yarhamukum ar-Rahman. Irhamu man fil ard. Yarhamukum man fis sama. Aw kama qala alayhi salatu wasallam. This was the foundation of their education of Islam. This was the first hadith that children learned in their education about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The most compassionate shows compassion to those who show compassion. Show compassion to those on earth, and the one in heaven will show you compassion. Compassion, 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 compassion. Rahma, 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 rahma. Why? Because our ulama want to drill into the mind of the child that rahmah is the greatest virtue. It's the greatest of virtues. This is what they want to give us, right? This is how we have to train our children. We have to start young. It's very important. The Prophet ﷺ is the beloved of God. People say there's no love in Islam. There's a hadith in Tirmidhi. The Prophet ﷺ is overhearing the Sahaba talking about the different prophets. And they said, Adam alayhi salam was chosen by Allah. And Musa alayhi salam is Kalimullah, the confidant of Allah. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is Khalilullah. And Isa alayhi salam is Ruh Allah, wa kalimatuhu. And the Prophet ﷺ, he approached them and he said, that's right. What you're saying is right. Ala wa ana habibullah, wa la fakhr. But I am the beloved of God, and I do not boast. Wa la fakhr means I'm not bragging. He's telling you the truth, right? The Prophet ﷺ tells us the truth. He's the beloved of Allah. He has a station of mahabbah. On the Yawm al-Qiyamah, everyone is terrified. Prophets are terrified. Nafsi, nafsi. This is a hadith in Bukhari. What is humanity doing here? They're seeking intercession with the Prophet ﷺ. This is called shafa'ah. Some people call it tawassul. Again, people say, don't say tawassul. What's the difference? Shafa'ah, tawassul. There's no difference. Istighatha, seeking assistance, seeking aid. This is what humanity is going to do on Yawm al-Qiyamah, according to Sahih Bukhari, the most correct book after the Quran. Kitab al-Anbiya, hadith number 1. Going to different prophets. Go to so-and-so, go to so-and-so. Ibrahim alayhi salam is trembling. Khalilullah, ana khaliluk. He said, I am your friend. I am your friend. And they go to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ana laha, I am for this. I mentioned this in this question. Ana laha. And he goes and makes sajda before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Irfa' ra'asak Muhammad. Ya Allah. Wa shafa'atu shafa'. Allah. This is the daraja of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He's the beloved of God. But he also had that tawadu. He had that humility, right? So he was proud of who he was. But he also had humility. This is how we should be. Ruhama'u baynahum. Right? Between ourselves, we have to have mercy. With strangers, we have mercy. We have easy going. Layyinul janib. The Prophet ﷺ is described by Imam Ali. He was very easy-going personality. There's some people you have to walk on eggshells. You might say something that's going to set them off and trigger them suddenly. And they lose it, start throwing things across the room. Right? So everyone feels uncomfortable around them. It's not how the Prophet ﷺ was. He was not like this. He was very gentle, easygoing disposition. This is something we have to remember. So, but he had that tawadu. Like the Bedouin came one time in his hallowed presence. The Bedouin started trembling like this. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he approaches and says, relax. I'm only the son of a woman who used to eat dried meat. You know, like beef jerky. I'm just the son of a woman who used to eat dried meat. Relax, relax. This is the same one who said, Ana sayyidu waladi Adam, wala fakhr. I'm the master of the children of Adam. Right? Because he has going to tell you the truth, but he has that tawadu. This is how we should be with people. Nobody, I always say this in almost all my talks, nobody knows a man better than his wife. The one that knows a man better than his wife is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because she lives with him. One of my teachers said, whatever type of Musa alayhi salam is outside the house, she knows the Fir'aun in the house. Right? So what does his wife say? Our mother Aisha, who was very, very young. This is the wisdom behind why she was very young. People have to look at the hikmah. She was the only wife of the Prophet that had not been married before. She became a fountain of incredible prophetic knowledge for decades. This is why she was so young. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ through our mother Aisha. Male Sahaba would come to her from behind the veil, give me fatwa. She was a mufti. One of 7 Sahaba that gave fatwa. She related over 1,000 hadith, one of 6 Sahaba. This is the wisdom behind it. Don't get it misconstrued. This is the reason behind it. They came to our mother Aisha. كيف كان رسول في البيت كان خلقه القرآن. How was the Prophet ﷺ in the house? His entire essence was the Quran. كان بشرا من البشر, a man amongst the men. لم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فاحشا ولا متفحشا. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم was never crude. He never used those 4-letter words. Foul language. Many of our youth today, it's part of their just normal everyday speech. There was a teenager brother in the masjid years ago. Inside the masjid, every 10 seconds he had to catch himself. Drop an F-bomb in the masjid. That was part of his everyday speech. I said, subhanAllah. The Prophet ﷺ, one of the signs of the end of time is the youth greeting each other with foul language. Right? SubhanAllah. Sadaqa Rasulullah. The Prophet ﷺ, he never used language like this. وَلَا سَخَابًا فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ, his wife says. Allah. He didn't raise his voice even in the souk. The souk where it's not aid to raise your voice, because you have to call people over to your merchandise. Right? Even in the souk, he didn't raise it. Even in jihad, he said, don't raise your voice. Your Lord is not deaf. In a military, martial struggle. وَلَا سَخَابًا فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. Right? And this is also how he's described in the Torah, by the way. The book of Isaiah, chapter 42. It says, هَنْ عَبْدِي إِثْمَخْبُ بِخِرِيرَةْ سَنَفْشِي. Behold my abd, whom I uphold. Mukhtari, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. There's a chapter in Isaiah, in the Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, a perfect description of the Prophet ﷺ. Behold my abd. This is how he's addressed, how he's called. Abd. This is the primary title of the Prophet ﷺ in the Quran. Subhanalladhi asra bi abdihi. Alhamdulillah alladhi anzala ala abdihi al-kitaba. تبارك الذي نزل الفرقان على عبده فأوحى إلى عبده ما أوحى. So Bani Israel, they know this title. And then it goes on to say, Lo yashmi'a bichutz qawlo. In Isaiah 42:6 in Hebrew, it says, he will not raise his voice in the souk. This is literally what it's saying, word for word. There's a literal translation. وَلَا سَخَابًا فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ. Our mother Aisha said, he didn't raise his voice in the souk. I mean, he's gentle, right? But he's principled. And then she says, وَلَا سَخَابًا فِي الْأَسْوَاقِ وَلَا يَجْزِي بِالسَّيِّئَةِ سَيِّئَةً. He did not return an evil for an evil. He did not return an evil for an evil. Now, when he's in Medina, he's the head of state. He has to establish justice, right? But for a personal wrong, he did not retaliate. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Like again, when the Bedouin would come, a Bedouin came one time, the Prophet ﷺ was wearing a thick Yemeni burda, right, with a very thick collar. The Bedouin took him by the collar and started moving him around like this. Ya Muhammad, give me something, give me something. Anas ibn Malik said, we can see inflammation on his neck. Allah. Right? And so the Sahaba, they took his hand off. What are you doing? And then the Prophet was smiling at him and said, shall I retaliate for how you treated me? And the Bedouin was shocked. He said, no. And he said, why not? He said, because I heard you never return an evil for an evil. Oh. This is what I heard about you. Right? So the Prophet said, Dahikan, he smiled. He said, that's correct. Fill up 2 camels. One, I mean, he was expecting a handout. Here's some wheat or something. He gave him basically like 2 U-Haul trucks. You know a U-Haul truck? 2 U-Haul trucks. Here, take this back to your people. This is what you can have. This man went back to his people. And he said, Wallahi, today I met the best of creation. A man who gives like he doesn't fear poverty. So going back to Mecca, people came into Mecca. Welcome to Mecca. Stay away from this man. One of them, Tufail ibn Amr ad-Dawsi, came into Mecca and he recognized the Prophet ﷺ. He saw the Prophet ﷺ, they described him. He was standing at the Kaaba reciting Quran. So Tufail ibn Amr ad-Dawsi, he took some cotton and he put it in his ears because they scared him. He's a sahir, he's a source. And he started making tawaf. And he said, he relates the hadith. He said, I started making tawaf. I passed by him. And Allah willed that something of the qira'ah entered into my mind. Allah. And I said, subhanallah, that was beautiful. So he said, I took some cotton out. I made another tawaf. I came again. I heard some more of this qira'ah. And I stopped. And I said, I went to him and I said, what is this? Who are you? Right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he explained it and immediately he became Muslim. And Tufail ibn Amr ad-Dawsi, he went back to Bani Daws, right? And he tried to make da'wah to them, it didn't work. He comes back to Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ, and he says, they're not responding to my da'wah. Can we force them to become Muslim? And the Prophet said, no, I'm not going to force anyone to become happy. How can you force iman in someone's heart? It doesn't make any sense. And he said, can you curse them then? Curse them. He said, عُدْ إِلَىٰ قَوْمِكَ وَرْعَهُمْ وَارْفُقْ بِهِمْ. Go back to your people and shepherd them and have rifq, have gentleness. And so he went back, he was patient, people started becoming Muslim. One of these who became Muslim, Abu Hurairah, became Muslim. Again, a fountain of prophetic knowledge. Imagine if the Prophet ﷺ said, yeah, let's curse them. No Abu Hurairah. SubhanAllah. This is the forward thinking of the Prophet ﷺ. When he stoned out of Ataie, and the angel of the mountains descended, he said, give me the word, I will pick up this mountain and smash it over this Bani Thaqif, Ta'if. He said, Bal arju. No, I have hope that from their descendants, someone يخرج من يعبد الله وحده ولا يشرك به شيئا. The Prophet is thinking about the future. He's forward thinking. Maybe in the future, when I'm gone, somebody from that Bani Ta'if will remember something I said, and they become Muslim, and the whole city, right now, the entire city is Muslim. It's all Muslim. This is how the Prophet ﷺ would treat people. This is how he would think. It's very important that we communicate the love of our tradition. It's very, very important. Very important, right? There was a certain woman in Medina. She had a very young son who was basically crawling around, and he managed to crawl out of the house and get lost. So she comes running out, and the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were standing outside the house. It happened to be there. And she's hysterical. My son, my son. So the Sahaba, they spread out. They found her son. Here's your son. She kissed her son, hugged him, and started to breastfeed him. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, can you imagine this woman putting her son in a fire? He said, La wallahi. By Allah, no. Allahu arhamu bi ibadihi min hadihi bi waladiha. Allah is more compassionate and merciful and loving to his ibad, to his servants. Abd is a very high title, right? Don't get all this baggage about the word abd. In the Quran, abd means a beloved of Allah. The Prophet, when he heard Abdullah ibn Mas'ud recite the Quran and refer to him as abd, he started crying immediately. The Prophet ﷺ, abd. Allah is more merciful to his abd than this woman is to her son right now. This is the love in our tradition. So we have to think about these things. It's very, very important that we communicate this, And, when we look at the major sins, al-kaba'ir, number one, al-ishraku billah. So parents have to take this into consideration. Al-ishraku billah, right? That in partnering with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, uququl walidain, filial recalcitrance, disrespect of parents. So, the Sahaba had parents that would torture them, but they did not reach adab with them. The Prophet ﷺ, he never told them, you should insult your parents then. No, he didn't do that. But he told them to be principled. Like we mentioned, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, 15 years old, became Muslim. His mother said, I'm not going to eat or comb my hair as long as you're Muslim. And he said, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm never going to leave Islam. After 2 weeks, she started to eat again. Because he showed principle. He was unwavering, right? But we have to be careful with our parents. There was a certain Sahabi, he was on his deathbed. The Prophet ﷺ visited him. And the Prophet said to him, قُلْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And he said, The Prophet ﷺ, he said, I know what's wrong. He goes and he finds his mother. And he says to her, what do you think about your son? And she said, I don't have a son. I disowned that guy. Allah. Are you pleased with your son? Nope. I want nothing to do with this person. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he ordered some Sahaba. He said, let's start a fire over here, outside of our house. Bring the wood, let's start the fire. He said, what are you doing, O Messenger of God? We're making a fire, we're going to put your son in the fire. And she said, no, no, no. And he said to her, you fear an earthly fire, but you're okay with your son entering the eternal flames of Jahannam? And she said, I forgive him. Wallahi, I forgive him. I forgive him. And The Prophet says, I went back to the Sahaba and said, قُلْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ Muhammadur Rasulullah. This is what was keeping his tongue from the Shahada. Subhanallah. So this is an issue we have. An issue that people are presenting our religion as being loveless. Something else, another point of miseducation is that Muslims are violent people, right? So I'd like to recommend a book by a Berkeley professor named M. Stephen Fish. He's a political science professor at UC Berkeley. It's called Are Muslims Distinctive? Are Muslims Distinctive? A look at the evidence, right? And he found that most Muslims in Muslim majority countries are actually not inclined to favor the fusion of religious and political authority, nor even remotely prone to mass political violence. And he found that while there's gender inequality, murder rates and class-based inequities are less severe among Muslims than non-Muslims. Listen to this one. According to the FBI and the Department of Justice, from 1980 to 2005, 94% of terrorist acts carried out in the US were done by non-Muslims. This is according to the Department of Justice, the FBI. From 1980 to 2005, 94% of acts that were classified as terrorism by the FBI and Department of Justice were done by non-Muslims. So, you know, I go to these interfaith gatherings a lot, and I always get the same question. Why don't Muslims condemn ISIS? Why don't Muslim scholars condemn ISIS? Right? So I ask the non-Muslims, I say, have you ever Googled Muslim scholars condemn ISIS? Nobody raises their hand. So I say, why not? Why don't you Google that? Well, I don't know. Have you heard of the open letter to Baghdadi? 120 Muslim scholars from all around the world. These are people who have sway over the hearts and minds of millions of Muslims all around the world. You never heard of this? 700,000 ulama in India signed a petition condemning ISIS. You haven't heard of this? So we have to know these facts. It's very, very important, right? So we have to tell our children, don't expect mainstream media to tell you the truth. You're not even going to get half the truth. You have to search for it. The reality is our information is selected for us, right? This is something that is a fact. Here's another something else to think about. Since 1970, again, this is according to government agencies, since 1970, there have been 140,000 terrorist attacks worldwide. Since 1970, there have been 140,000 terrorist attacks worldwide, according to the Department of Defense. If all of these were done by Muslims, all of them, that's 0.00009% of the Muslim Ummah. If all of them were done by Muslims, that's 0.00009% of the Muslim Ummah. And they make the argument, Islam is inherently violent. This is called a non sequitur argument. You will be laughed out of any logic class if that's your data and your conclusion is, therefore Islam is a violent religion. You know, in 1925, 60,000 hooded Klansmen marched on Washington. You know, in the 1920s, according to PBS, national membership of the KKK in America was between 3 to 8 million in the United States. That means in the 1920s, there were potentially twice the number of Klansmen living in America than there are Muslims right now living in America. Twice the number. But I would never say, therefore, Christianity is a violent, racist religion. Why? Because I know better. I have a brain. There's 2 billion Christians. This is one small group of idiots. But why don't people know that? And why do Muslims they fall for the, what do they call it, the okie doke, right? They just fall for the trick, right? Muslim youth, they fall for it. Older Muslims that have been here for a while and converted, they know what's happening. They're not going to fall for it. But Muslim youth, I guess I can't join this violent religion anymore. And, you know, it's just, you know, my philosophy professor, he has a PhD, so obviously he knows, he's Shaykh al-Islam, you know. My father, who studied for 20 years and, you know, has an accent, he doesn't know anything. But this philosophy professor who teaches critical theory, he's an atheist, he's a moral relativist, he knows exactly what he's talking about. What happened? We have to use our brains. Sometimes you have to draw analogies for people. Oftentimes people don't know the difference, believe it or not. And I'm talking about graduate level students. I teach some classes where there are Christians that are doing their Masters of Divinity, and they have to take a class on Islam as part of their requirements. So I asked them, what's the difference between Muslim and Islam? Most don't even know. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me, are you Islam? And I say, whoa, that's a deep question. It's pretty deep, huh? Am I Islam? SubhanAllah. Deep existential question. So I said, look, Muslim is to Islam as Christian is to Christianity. Right? Sometimes we have to spell it out like that. ISIS is to Islam as the KKK is to Christianity. Abdul Hakim Muradi said, terrorism is to jihad as adultery is to marriage. Terrorism is to jihad. Sometimes they look the same. If you're not trained, it might look the same. As adultery is to marriage. Right? So we have to be on guard. Al-Amru Jid, the Prophet ﷺ said, the affair is serious. Take your life seriously. You're more likely to be struck by lightning and die than to be shot by a Muslim terrorist in America? Did you know you're more likely to slip in the bathtub and hit your head and die than to be shot by a Muslim terrorist in America? It's absolutely true. Did you know you're more likely to be killed by a toddler? Every so often, a toddler finds their parent's gun and shoots someone dead. This happens more than we know. You're more likely to be shot by a toddler than be killed by a Muslim terrorist in America. So we have to think about these things. Don't be embarrassed. Somebody asks you, are you Muslim? Oh, they're going to think I'm a terrorist. No. 99.99999% of Muslims are completely peace-loving, beautiful people that will have nothing to do with violence. Right? But we have to be principled. We're in the Meccan period. Right? Or people talk about Sharia. When we think of Sharia, we think of prayer and halal, haram food and Ramadan. Non-Muslims, they hear the word Sharia, they think we're going to cut off a hand or something. They think about hudud. If you look at a book of Sharia, 99% of the book is prayer and fasting, commercial law, all these types of tahara, ibadat. At the very end, it's called Kitab al-Hudud. And that doesn't even apply to us. Only the Sultan can apply the hudud in a Muslim majority country. So that has absolutely nothing to do with us in America. People say the Constitution and Sharia are incompatible. Really? Sherman Jackson, Dr. Sherman Jackson, said, look at Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, drafted by kuffar. Right? Drafted by kuffar. And it said, Muhammadun Rasulullah. And Suhail ibn Amr, he said, if I believed you were the messenger of God, I would not be fighting you right now. Strike that part out. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told Sayyidina Ali, erase that part. And Sayyidina Ali, the first time he ever said no to the Prophet, I'm not going to erase this. I'm not going to erase Muhammad Rasulullah. I'm not going to erase Rasulullah. Please don't ask me to do that. So he said, show me where it is. He says right here, the Prophet struck it out. So a document, a political document, right, that is secular, that was written by kuffar, that has no mention of the Prophet's risala, the Prophet ﷺ said, this is binding upon the entire ummah. Didn't find it in contradiction to the Sharia. If you look at Jewish law, talk about hudud. SubhanAllah. The stoning is not mentioned once in the Quran. It's taken from hadith and ijtihad, things like sunnah. It's not in the Quran. There's no hudud of stoning in the Quran. Right? In the Bible, 10, 15 times you have stoning. For what? Adultery? For picking up wood on the Sabbath. This is what it says in Torah. If you pick up wood on the Sabbath, you will be stoned to death. It says in Torah, a child who curses his father is stoned to death. Uquq al-walidain is a capital offense according to the Torah. This is a hukum of the Torah. Right? But how do Jews live in America? Why don't these politicians point to the Jewish communities on the East Coast that are living according to halakha, their Sharia is called halakha, and say, your law is incompatible with the US Constitution. They would never do that, because then they'd be labeled anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
That's the reason. Pick on us though. We're like a doormat. Wipe your feet on us. We need to stick up for ourselves. Assertive nonviolence. Assertive but nonviolent. Right? So we need to be intellectually sophisticated. And the Prophet ﷺ was living in Medina al-Munawwarah, and Ammar ibn Yasir was made to watch his parents be tortured and killed in front of his eyes. Ammar ibn Yasir. The Prophet ﷺ, he was just, he was lamenting for weeks and weeks. Couldn't get over it. Imagine the trauma of that. The Prophet ﷺ would comfort him. And Abu Jahl and his cronies did it. But the Prophet ﷺ never said to Ammar ibn Yasir, okay, here, take this sword. This is Abu Jahl's house. Go get your revenge.